Joining us now to talk about that and more is Walled Lake Consolidated School District Superintendent Kenneth Gutman with us once again on the Oakland County MegaCast. Superintendent Gutman, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Tyler. How are you?
Doing well. How are your educators doing as well? It's a tough time for them.
I'm not sure I have the right answer for that at this point. A lot of people are on summer break, and I think everybody's just really nervous trying to figure out what's going to happen when we reopen.
Last week, the governor and attorney general announced the state is joining 4 other states in a lawsuit against Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education for the United States, claiming that the U.S. Department of Education is attempting to reroute CARES Act funding from public schools to private learning institutions. Your thoughts on Secretary DeVos's interpretation of the CARES Act funding and how that may impact school districts like Walled Lake?
I support the lawsuit. We certainly have I do believe that our non-public schools, the people who attend those do pay taxes and they should be able to recuperate some of the money. However, it needs to be done in an equitable formula, and Secretary DeVos her formula is not equitable. And so I support the lawsuit, think we're doing the right thing.
What are your plans going forward in the fall?
Good morning, Ronnie. So we have a committee of about 80 people right now finalizing those plans, interpreting the governor's roadmap. I assume, and I don't have the final version before me, I'll be getting that in the next week or so. I'm sure we're going to have a fully virtual option for parents who don't feel comfortable sending their children, and also a 5-day-a-week in-person plan. I'm sure we'll have a hybrid plan on the back burner, but I don't think that will be one of the predominant plans coming forward from this committee, from what I hear so far.
So one of the big issues right now, before you even get the kids in the classrooms, we also do a lot of school sports. How is your district addressing that, and do you see sports happening in the fall?
So we do have a plan. We have some of our teams practicing right now. They're following social distancing, temperatures, the whole deal. They're doing it the right way. And if someone were to test positive, there is a procedure for that as well, with notification to everyone, as well as a plan to quarantine them again before they could return. So we have that going on. The bigger question, Ronnie, is what happens in the fall. I would love to see athletics return. I think there's such great spirit when you look at a Friday night football game or some of our other athletics. But do I see it happening? Gosh, I don't know. I tend to doubt it. I know that the Big Ten has cut down its schedule. The Big Ten commissioner has said, I'm not sure it's going to happen. I don't know that high school athletics happens, especially if college athletics is not something that's going to be happening.
What about busing? That's one thing I always wonder, because how can you separate kids, do social distance on a bus when the seats are so close together? Or will you limit how many kids are on a bus?
So there aren't enough buses in the state of Michigan for every district to have social distancing on a bus. It's just not possible to have social distancing on a bus. And so I look forward to seeing what our district's final plan is as our committee puts it together, but I do not anticipate that there's any way we'll be able to socially distance and still transport all of our students to school.
Kenneth Gutman with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. He is the superintendent of the Walled Lake Consolidated School District. In addition to Betsy DeVos's interpretation of the CARES Act, last week on the state of Michigan front, the governor recently, not last week, but in the recent weeks, released her Return to Learn Council's plans for the fall and released their Michigan Safe Schools Return to Learn roadmap, as they called it. How's that going to impact Walled Lake's plans for fall?
I think it's a great roadmap. I think the governor and her committee did a fantastic job. We're really, really happy with what they did, because it not only gives us some guidelines and some suggestions, but it also allows for local control. And we always advocate for local control. And so our committee is working to interpret that to make sure that its plan fits within the governor's plan. And we look forward to sharing that with our community in the very near future.
One thing we like to do is, out of every negative, there's a positive. Out of this crisis, what has your district learned that you think will lead to positive change down the road?
Well, we've learned that we can deliver virtual instruction, and it's certainly never going to replace face-to-face instruction. Our staff members have been unbelievable. Our teachers, our administrators done a great job with that. but virtual instruction can happen. What that means for the future of snow days may make students less happy. So there's that. I've also seen that the human spirit, the community spirit, has been tremendously high. Our staff put out hundreds of thousands of meals, turned around on a dime and delivered virtual instruction. And our community just kept contacting us saying, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? Donating money, donating their time. We had just a whole slew of volunteers. It just warms the heart that at a time of crisis, the Walled Lake Consolidated School District family, the entire community came together to help children.
One thing that came out of this too is the digital divide. There are so many kids that just didn't have access to computers at home or a solid internet connection. How have you been able to address that issue in your district?
We did give out, I want to say 1,000 Chromebooks to families that didn't have access. But we did find that we had about 95% participation in online activities. But the reality is until you have 100%, you're not doing what's best for every child. And so we need to find a way to bridge that gap. We know that we're in far better shape than a lot of places with that kind of participation, but even one child shouldn't be lost in this whole shuffle.
These kids are really resilient. I will say I'm sitting here thinking of the snow days, and they do that little game where you like put an ice cube in the toilet and all those little fun things that, like you said, will probably now go away because you can learn at home. Do you think, what about testing and all of this? I don't think we've really heard much about how this virtual teaching could impact the testing requirements for some of these kids. And also, the ACT, the SAT, how does that impact those programs as well?
Well, as far as the ACT and the SAT, we've asked our state, and our state has lobbied our Secretary of Education to not do not do standardized testing in the fall. And so ACT, SAT, we think should be offered at some point, but in-person standardized testing in the fall should be waived so we can focus on children. We also know that authentic testing is more than a typical exam where you sit down and take what we used to just call a test, that there are authentic ways of assessing student learning, and it's much more difficult to do so virtually. But I think we're going to get a lot better at it. There's no doubt we're going to get much better at this because we're going to have many more opportunities to do this. We're not done with virtual instruction. In fact, we'll continue to do it over the next several years, I'm sure, and particularly this year.
Kent Gutman with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. In the state budget, Governor Whitmer and Republicans in the legislature came to an agreement on hundreds of millions of dollars of federal CARES Act money that the state will be forwarding to the high school. To the school system in the state of Michigan. What will those funds do to help school districts like Walled Lake get ready for the fall and maybe make up some of those funds that were lost in budgetary cuts this year?
Well, we anticipate that we'll get some funds for PPE and that sort of thing. The difficulty is, Tyler, we know that our budget will be cut from last year to some degree, and we know that going forward, we don't have a budget. So I've talked about this on here before, so I won't belabor it, but we are in July 13th. Our school year starts July 1st, and we don't know how much money we have this year, and we know there's over $1 billion shortfall in the school aid fund. And so without knowing how much funding we have and knowing that the requirements for school districts are significantly more than they were before, not just in terms of PPE, but in terms of social emotional needs of students and staff, we're not in a good place financially. And so we would implore our federal government and our state government to find a way to fund schools so we can take care of our children.
How do you go forward in this case then, not knowing how much money you have for this year? Because you want to be cautious so that you're not blowing money away, and then you end up with these huge cuts, and you're in a huge, and then you're in a big hole. But at the same time, you don't want to be too cautious and then realize, oh no, we could have had all these other programs in place. We didn't need to lay off all these people or reduce all these programs. So what do you do as a school district in that case? So you're being cautious but not too cautious without knowing the money you have.
So the difficulty is we have to have a balanced budget sent to the state of Michigan by June 30th. So we've already had to make reductions. We had to lay off nearly 50 teachers, and we have such outstanding educators that it's just disturbing to lay off some of these teachers whom we know are just really good for kids. We've had to cut some programs. We've had to reduce some administrative positions. We've done all of this because we have to balance the budget. We would like nothing more than to be able to restore these positions, to be able to call our staff members back, to lower class sizes. All of that can happen if we are able to find the funding, particularly, I'm guessing, federally, in terms of a stimulus package for education that's unrestricted. But we had no choice but to make reductions by June 30th, or we would not have been able to send a balanced budget to the state of Michigan.
Kenneth Gutman with us on the Oakland County Megacast on a family of TV and radio stations all throughout the local area. Today we're also on the Facebook page of the Walled Lake Consolidated School District. So with the recent uptick in cases, Superintendent Gutman, any worries about the potential of having kids and having educators back in the buildings in the fall? And I know you mentioned before that you're working right now on a date to make that final decision. But what factors are going in? Because some schools are saying, okay, we'll have half capacity on in-person days, and the other people will be virtual and half capacity on other days, and vice versa. But even with half capacity and social distancing and mask wearing, there's still a potential to spread. And if the cases are continuing to spike by the time school's coming around, what's going to be the case then? Are schools just going to be entirely closed again like they were through March? And are we better equipped now than we were in March to deal with that?
That's a really good series of questions, and I don't think anybody has the answers yet. The reality is we're going to have a plan in the next week or so, week and a half, that outlines what we're going to do in the fall, and it'll be a combination of virtual and in person. However, that plan's only as good as the day it's written. And the reality is, as cases continue to spike, at the point in which, and I'm quite sure our governor's been very clear that she won't send students to school in person if cases continue to rise. So we're going to err on the side of safety for our students and staff. I worry about our teachers. We can talk about the safety of our students, which is paramount. We understand that's the most important thing we can do is provide a safe environment for students and staff. The reality is our staff members are older than our students, are more susceptible potentially, and so we need to protect them as well. I'm very concerned about that, but I also know that we need to watch the numbers and work with our local and our state government, work with our governor to make the best decision to keep everybody safe.
So do you think it would be better to almost approach at least the first half of the year with a virtual plan instead of possibly going in half and half and then having to pull back? Because I would think that you want some type of consistency for the kids.
It really depends on where the numbers are as we start approaching the school year in another, 6 weeks? Because at home, virtual learning, while our teachers do a fantastic job with it, no doubt about that, it's also difficult for students, a lot of students, to learn that way, one. And two, the psychological effects of being home also creates an issue for our students. So when we talk about better, sure, maybe health-wise it would be better. And if that's the case, then we need to keep everyone home. And at the same time, in terms of learning, it's not better to be home. So, but again, what will drive us is the health and safety of our students and staff. And we won't be able to make that call until we get closer to the first day. If cases continue to escalate as they are, and we continue to see an upward trend, I can't imagine schools would open across the state of Michigan, across the country.
One thing we have seen, and we have talked to other school leaders about this as well, when you're dealing with kids, they are kids. Like even today, I'll see kids out with their mask on. It's kind of like up over their nose, over their eyes, down over their chin. How are you going to be able to convince kids and to teach kids to wear a mask in a classroom all day?
Good question. If you have the answer and would like to share it, I would really appreciate it. We know that's going to be a challenge. We understand that there's some flexibility with early childhood, but we also know that this is a new reality. We would expect, and look, I fully endorse wearing a mask. I know there are those who are concerned about it, and there are those who will ask us to make sure students don't. And we certainly have an allowance for students who are not medically able to wear a mask. We're going to try to accommodate every one of our children. But trying to keep a mask on a third grader, a kindergartner, a high school senior will be a challenge, and it's something we're going to have to work through.
Kenneth Gutman, Superintendent of the Walled Lake Consolidated School District, with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. Before we let you go, anything else, Superintendent?
I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to you again. I'm really grateful to work in a community that supports education and cares about our children. We're going to do everything we can to educate our children, and we certainly look for the input and opinions of our community as well. We always encourage them to email us at info@wlcsd.org. We welcome your partnership and really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for being on with us today.
Thank you.
Superintendent Kenneth Gutman from the Walled Lake Consolidated School District with us on the Oakland County MegaCast.